Hello and welcome back to Open and Now with us via Zoom. We have with us content creator and bookstagrammer Sharon Velez-Diodonet. Hello, Sharon.
Hi, happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Now, Sharon, let's begin off the top. What is a bookstagrammer?
So, bookstagrammer is a space for book lovers within the larger context of Instagram. And what denotes a bookstagrammer is that they use the hashtag like hashtag bookstagram or hashtag bookstagrammer. So, it's a space that was created by book lovers to share books, to amplify books that we don't see around, to put book reviews, photos of books, share list of books. So it's all things for book nerds.
Now, you have your own bookstagram. How did you start it?
So in the beginning, I didn't even know that Bookstagram existed. So I was sharing like parts of my life on my regular Instagram, but also like sharing books. And then I noticed that I started getting like suggestions of people to follow that were specifically book related. And that's how I happened to come upon like the Bookstagram world. So I decided to make, my own page separate from my personal page. And I just started like sharing books, but it also took me on a journey of trying to find books where I saw myself and like marginalized communities. And I wanted to see like books that weren't like the ones that are pushed every 5 minutes on like booksellers list. And then I started to find like little pockets of people that shared interests, and it just grew from there. Connecting with people on social media, that's the beauty of social media. You never know, like a simple picture that you put like or something that you wrote touches someone else. So I started talking to different people and realized that I wasn't the only person that felt like it's not that we don't like to read or we don't want to read, but it's hard to connect to stories that are not tied to who we are as people. So I created the hashtag read Puerto Rican to specifically highlight Puerto Rican authors, and I started making like book lists of recommendations for people in different categories like nonfiction, books about Puerto Rican history, and started building community from there.
You've hit on another very strong and powerful point there. Some people say that, well, minority people don't read, they don't have the history, they don't have the culture, they don't have the habit, but in reality, people love to read. I host BronxNet's Spanish language public affairs program, Diálogo Abierto, on a regular basis, and the best viewed and the highest viewed segments usually have to do with books and literature. So there is an interest, but if publishing companies are not publishing stories and authors that resonate with our communities, then you won't see the numbers. But in reality, the numbers do exist, correct?
Yes, they do. And part of the problem too is that people read differently. So you also have to take into, I don't think that publishing takes into the fact of like different economic status. So not everyone has $40 to pay for a book, but they might go to the library. So a lot of times that's the first thing that gets cut out. It's the library. So it's also a thing about accessibility and who has access to resources, because people are using the libraries, and you see this movement of like libraries saying like we need to stop cutting funding because people, this is some, for some people that is their only access to reading. Now we have the ability to have ebooks and also audiobooks, so people with disabilities now have access to books. So I think like publishing is pushing the needle a little bit in that they're publishing different sorts of books so that more people have access, and they're starting to see that people are reading. It just might be that reading habits have changed. But I noticed too that with the Puerto Rican community, it was always like this feeling of we don't read. Like I have a friend who works in publishing, not anymore. She started like her own company because she would hear things like, oh, Latinos don't read, they don't know how to read. Like they have this like stigma attached to who we are as people that we don't read. But as far back as I could think of, in my family, there's always been Spanish newspapers that tied us back to everything that was going on, not only in Puerto Rico, but on the island. people have this myth that the jibaros are like, which are the people who live like in the mountains in Puerto Rico and other places in the Caribbean, that they don't read, yet they are the ones that know the most about the political climates of their country, because they've always been connected to like newspapers. A lot of our history is like oral, and it gives rise to this idea of whose stories are valid. So a lot of our history is passed down orally. It's who's taking the chance on letting us tell our stories and sharing it with other people, because they keep like making our stories like into this, like it's magic. It's like this weird sort of like whose stories are valid and whose histories are valid.
In your interactions with the publishing industry, as well as readers through your bookstagram space, what kinds of books are the most popular out there? What types of stories? What are people doing these days and reading these days?
So a lot of people, I notice, like fantasy is like exploding right now, because before it was a very like white market. So everyone knows like the Lord of the Rings and the Game of Thrones. So you have a lot of Latinos now, you have a lot of Black, and you have a lot of indigenous people that are like, hey, we've always had fantasy, we've always had folklore, like this is our history, like these are just stories that we've been telling. And you are seeing a lot of explosion in like the fantasy world of BIPOC authors, BIPOC authors now writing fantasy. Thrillers, the thriller genre, like was always a very like male dominated genre. You're seeing a lot of women write thrillers. You're seeing a lot of authors of color writing thrillers and horror. Horror is another like underrated genre that a lot of people tend to stay away, or have like this stigma that they think that it's not as great as other sorts of writing. But in the genre of horror, there's always been like a conversation with social commentary. Like horror has always like exposed like things that are going on in the world, but in dark ways. So I would say like those are the three genres that are like really like exploding. And I'm seeing a lot of like historical fiction about places like the Caribbean, about places like Latin America. So there's a lot more need of like allowing us to tell our stories within just not nonfiction, but also in fiction, allowing us to be creative in the ways that we tell those stories.
You mentioned that you developed your passion for reading as a child. You mentioned the Scholastics fair. What was it that reading and books taught you that you did not get from any other forms of media and entertainment or education?
I feel like for me, books quieted the world. So I grew up, in the 80s, New York City. I've seen the crack era, the different wars that were going on in the world. So for me, like reading allowed me to step into a different world. Reading helped to improve my vocabulary. Reading helped to teach me English, because when I went into school, I did not speak English. I was a Spanish speaker. And the only option was that they wanted to put me in my bilingual. And my mom was like, no, like I will get her the books. My mom enrolled herself in like English classes, and she was like, I will do the work, but she's going to like regular classrooms. So for me, like I've always been attracted to the imaginary, to the arts. And it was fun to see like girls in stories. I grew up like reading like Nancy Drew, like girls solving mysteries. And I also wanted to be like Indiana Jones. I wanted to be like the female version of that. So something that I really love was that my mom used to always take me to like Barnes and Nobles and buy me books about dinosaurs. Like to this day, I'm still obsessed with dinosaurs. I would even like dig up my backyard looking for dinosaur bones, because reading introduced me to so many like aspects of culture and like things that were out there that I normally wouldn't have been exposed to, because a lot of things require money. And I didn't come from a background where we had a lot of money. So books were like the solution to a lot of like my curiosities and imaginations.
It seems that books had a very powerful impact upon your sense of imagination, and a lot of people seem to underestimate imagination as a vital pillar of success in throughout life.
Absolutely. And I think reading also gives you a window into someone else's world and someone else's perspective. And, you know, by day, I work in the medical social work field. So I think one of the best things that I've gotten from reading is that it has allowed me to learn about other cultures and how view the world. And it helps me improve like my communication skills, cultural competency. It helps me imagine a world that doesn't look like me from someone else's perspective in order to help them in my professional life. And I feel that it also, one of the biggest things it does is that it helps to build empathy, because a lot of times we live in the world of like, we're in this routine of like, we have to go to work, we have to get up, we're doing things with kids, we're constantly like producing. And I feel like reading slows down the world, and it allows you to like put yourself in someone else's shoes and gives you empathy for other things that are going on that you may have missed, that you didn't know about. And I pride myself on, I always tell people that I'm a citizen of the world. So I love people. I want to know people. So I'm always looking for ways to connect with people. And books have always been that for me.
Besides your Bookstagram space, you also have a book club. How does it work?
So I have a virtual book club that grew out of another hashtag that I started, which was Puerto Rican. It was PR Heritage Month tour. So in the month of November, I run a virtual tour where I ask Puerto Rican creators and to highlight different books. So it's a virtual tour for Puerto Rican Heritage Month. And from that tour, we realized that a lot of us haven't read these books. We want to read these books and we just don't have anybody to talk about it. So I created a Read Puerto Rican Book Club, which you can find on the Book Club's app. So there's an app now where someone who wants to find a book club can just download that app, and they can find like book clubs based off of what they like to read. Is it the format? Is it that they like virtual? So mine's is strictly virtual. I invite authors to come and join us to have a discussion. So they do a quick reading, we do a Q&A, and I really like the format because it connects authors to readers, to the Puerto Rican audience and Puerto Rican authors, which I feel sometimes we don't see enough Puerto Rican authors. I feel like a lot of times, like they just think Latinos are all the same, and we have a lot of similarities based off of like, you know, things in history, but there are still like subtle nuances that makes us who we are, each individual country. So I thought it was really cool that I could bring Puerto Rican authors who may not be so well known into a more intimate space with readers from their same demographic, their same audience. And it wasn't only for Puerto Ricans. So I have now members that are not Puerto Rican, just people that want to like know more and broaden their horizons and are looking to like learn about other people, connect with other people. And I pretty much do it virtually through like Google Meet. I create a link and anyone who wants to join can join.
Sharon, in the final seconds that we've got very quickly, we were talking off camera about the need and importance of, besides cultivating the people of color market for book readership and also cultivating and nurturing the work of writers. Tell me a little bit about the importance of actually preparing and ensuring that people of color also have a seat at the table as executives in the publishing industry, where decisions are being made about who gets published, and what doesn't.
So a few years ago, some larger creators had a town hall with people in publishing where people got to voice their concerns, because we saw that books weren't being marketed to the right audience. We were being left out in the process of like early readers. And a lot of times we are the avenue that gets like books out there and for people to know these books, because the authors of color weren't getting like marketing budgets as big as other authors. So we did have a town hall where we got to talk to people in publishing. In New York City, we had that HarperCollins. Recently, we had a HarperCollins strike where, you know, people on the lower level were fighting for like a living wage. They were fighting for like more diversity hires. They were fighting for like people to have more positions in the executive change. And I think the more they see that people of color are reading, I tell people to talk about books, show books. I think the more we keep talking to publishers directly and giving them open and honest feedback, we're seeing some small changes. So now a lot of the publishers have influencer programs where they are doing early marketing campaigns, and they're sending books specifically to people of color. So they're getting the books into the right hands so that we're reaching other audience. But I think there still is a lot of work to be done as getting people in those top positions. And I think a lot of the authors themselves are starting to see this. So right now, instead of like being the people to gatekeep, they're being the ones of like, this is not my story to tell, but I know this great Dominican author who has a great story to tell, and they can be the one. So I think it takes like the ones who have the power giving up a little bit of the power and bringing someone else along with them.
Definitely, it is a conversation that is worth having and that is worth continuing. So I look forward to continuing to address this with you in both English and Espanol.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time and just talking to me about my love of books.
Thank you. That was Sharon Velez-Diodonet, content creator and bookstagrammer. Now, for more information about her work, visit her Instagram at bookdragon217. We continue with Open.